and welcome to my channel, where we muddle through all the smoke and mirrors to find the facts and expose the truth about Blacks all over the world, their history, and the quote-unquote Bible. You heard me right. Yes, the Bible. So let's get to it. I'm Gabora Kafira, your host. So welcome to my channel. Oh, and before we start, for the Pharisees in the back, I have my covering. Baby, shout out the people.
Yay.
All right, so let's get to it. To get to the truth, at Smoke and Mirrors, we use set-apart texts, DNA reports and findings, archeology reports, writings from historians, ancient maps, credible scientific reports and theories. We also use timelines and scientific evidence to not only prove the people in the set-apart text, aka the Bible, not only existed, but also that these set-apart texts outlines a history of a people. Nothing in these videos are my thoughts or my opinions. It is all factual information. These are some of the sites that I regularly visit. Don't worry, they will all be added at the end of each video. Also, the further we go on, there are going to be other sites that I get information from, and at the time, the site information will be listed as well.
My people have perished for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being priest for me. Since you have forgotten the Torah of your Elohim, I also forget your children.
Remember in Kings when it says, if my people, what's it say? Who are called by my name, humble themselves and pray and turn from their wicked ways. And what's the next part? Then I will hear from heaven and I will heal your land. How many of you realize that he's only talking about one group of people in that verse, in that chapter? It is right here, the northern kingdom of Israel, who went away from their God. And he says, if my people, those people, in context, the northern kingdom, that nobody knows who they are. Isn't that strange? A prophecy about people that we don't have a clue who they are?
Malcolm X stated that history is a people's memory, and without a memory, man is demoted to the lower animals. History is passed down many ways. In prehistoric time, and what I mean by prehistoric time, I mean the time before written history, the history was passed down orally. Oral history was passed down through folk tales, songs, chants, or poetry. We never thought to question how a complete Hebrew sentence was being sung by slaves, and has become one of the most famous Negro spirituals. The set-apart text does not record the history of all people. It is only indicative to one. It does, however, record the start of every nation. When we see these books in any form, we have been automatically programmed to think religion, as well as crosses, and Jesus. But what if what we were led to believe about these sacred texts has all been a ruse? But what if the sacred text has nothing to do with religion at all, but instead are books passed down to a certain people, telling them of their history and messages to their future generation, telling them of their ancestors' mistakes and victories, instructions on how they were to live, and a map to redemption.
The Bible was written to the Jews, and in the New Testament it was written to Christians. That is the assumption. That is not what the Bible says. The Bible says it was written to all of Israel. Only 10 didn't come back.
What we know so far about Black history Our history is what they've taught us in their schools and shown us on their screens. And that is that we washed up on the shores of Europe, America, Spain, Portugal, in ships, in chains. But due to technological advancement and knowledge at our fingertips, we now know better.
Doesn't that sound very similar? I would put money on it if I didn't know it, that he's talking about a prophecy about them going into Egypt and coming out, but that just happened. This is at the Jordan River. He's talking about a future time. So the 10 tribes were taken into captivity and dispersed all across Assyria. Over time, they assimilated into the nations and became exactly what the prophecy said of Ephraim, the Mela Goyim, the fullness of the nations. They became as Gentiles. It's a shock as we move through the New Testament. You'll see this. 2 chapters later, Deuteronomy 31-6 says, "Now it shall come to pass when all these things shall come upon you, the blessings and the curse which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among the nations where the Lord God drives you, and you return to the Lord your God and obey his voice according to all that I command you today, you and your children with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength, that Yahweh your Elohim will bring you back from captivity."
When Moshe ended speaking all these words to Israel, he said to them, "Set your heart on all the words with which I warn you today, so that you command your children to guard to do all the words of this Torah. For it is not a worthless word for you, because it is your life. And by this word you prolong your days on the soil which you pass over the Jordan to possess."
Now, before we stroll through the pages of this historical document to find out whose history religion hijacked, we are going to discuss some facts. I don't want to be halfway through these documents and still discussing on how to read a timeline or what the first man and woman looked like. To get all of these facts straight, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. The scientific theory behind the Earth's creation was started by a good friend of Mr. Albert Einstein by the name of Mr. George Latimer. Among other things, he was also a Catholic priest. So now let's get into this Big Bang theory. So, using Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity, along with mathematical models, astronomers developed a workable theory that the Earth was just a bunch of neutrons, protons, electrons, and a bunch of other trons that started to come together and form a ball. And once the trons formed into a big enough ball, like a balloon, it burst. Once the explosion happened, our galaxy was born. With the formation of the galaxies, the environment was still hostile. Everything was colliding into each other. So when 2 planets collided, Earth was born. Scientists told us that this formation of the Earth took place roughly 4.8 billion years ago. And that after the formation, the Earth was inhabitable because it was a fiery ball. It was so hot that oxygen couldn't even survive on the planet. So nothing could grow. No humans, no plants, no animals, nothing. And nothing would be able to grow until 3.8 billion years ago. In a published article written in 2020 by the University of California, written by a Dr. Stuart Wolfman, suggested that life on Earth began much sooner than the scientists had originally thought. In 2022, Science Daily posted an article where they interviewed a Dr. Harrison from the National Academy of Sciences. And he stated that not only have they gotten the date of the planet wrong, but life on Earth may have started almost instantaneously. We've all heard about Pangea, and with it being the latest supercontinent, I can understand why. But before we had Pangea, we had Gondwana. Gondwana was approximately 541 million years ago. And I want you to make sure that you pay attention to that because that information will come in handy in a later video. So we have Gondwana, and as you can see, Africa, South America, Madagascar, India, Australia, Antarctica, Arabia, they were all connected. Science told us that the continents were continuously breaking up and merging due to tectonic plates that sits under the earth that are constantly moving and shifting the landmass. Well, they've just discovered that those same plates that broke us up are also now bringing us back together. And they're moving faster than they had originally thought.
Yahuwah shall put under the band the tongue of the sea of Mizraim, and he shall wave his hand over the river with the might of his spirit, and shall strike it in the 7 streams, and shall cause men to tread it in sandals.
This is a map from time maps, and I want you to pay special close attention to the parts of the world where Africa, the Middle East, Asia, and Europe are still connected. This map is from 3,500 BC or BCE, however you use it. So Alpulon is the name of the continent pre-colonizer. Should I say colonizer or colonial? Colonizers? Okay. So Alpulon is the name of the continent pre-colonizer. We're not talking about prehistoric time. We're talking pre-colonizer time. So this was the name of it in like the 11th century or, the 12th century, somewhere in there. And do you see it's still connected to quote unquote the Middle East? This is a map from 1648. Yes, I mean the year 1648. This is not BC, this is AD or CE, depending on how you use it. But as you can see, that part of the world is very much still connected. I know you're probably asking yourself now, well, when did the Middle East become a continent of its own? And the answer to that question is, it's tricky. And here's why. The Near East was actually a geographic term. It was used to describe the place of where it was at. So if they said Far East, then they were talking about China, Japan, the Asian places. If they said the Middle East or Near East, that means that this is the land that's closest to Europe. So, and according to Britannica, it is still not a continent of its own. It is still technically a region of Africa. It's the second part of that answer that makes that question tricky to answer. So in 1850, the Europeans decided that they wanted to cut Israel away from Egypt. It took them 19 years, 1.5 million people to complete this project. They dug as deep as they could. The canal is 120 miles long or wide. So they literally cut away all the land in between Egypt and Israel. and it is known today as the Suez Canal. Timelines are created by using history, science, and archaeology reports. All three have to agree in order for a timeline to be created. Now, we aren't going to delve into timelines too deeply because the only thing that we need to really know is how to read the information and the dates on the timeline. And yes, timelines do change. History timelines are placed in chronological order. That means that the things on the timeline are placed in the order in which they happened. And as we discussed previously, because they're still finding out things, that is what will cause a timeline to change or shift. It doesn't necessarily mean that things didn't happen. They may have gotten the wrong dates on things, and that may need to be adjusted. When you're looking at a timeline, everything that's on the left, that's under BC or BCE, that means that it was early in history. Anything that's on the right, that's under AD or CE, means that it is in the current time. This is a close-up view of the history timeline. They actually have one that goes back a little bit further. You can find one that starts at 3,500 BCE, but this particular one right here starts at 3,000 BC. And if you notice, each continent is broken down, and on that history timeline, you can look and see what exactly was going on at that period in time on that continent. You can also find history timelines in a written form. Some find these easier to read. The words aren't all jumbled up. Everything is just listed. Remember when I explained that timelines change? And it is due to archaeological finds like this one. This is the London Hammer, and it was found in London, Texas. Now, the actual date of this hammer is unknown, and that's because once the scientists dated the rock that it is encased in, it was purchased by the Creation Evidence Museum. And once they get artifacts, no longer testing can be done on it. Now, what was exciting about this hammer is that the encasing of it, the rock, dates back between 400 and 500 million years old. Now, if you remember when we discussed Gondwana land, that would put this hammer in that time. So now scientists are trying to find out who made this hammer. What did they do with this hammer? Were people really alive during that time? Those are things that are going to shift the timeline of creation. So far we know that there have been humans for at least 4 million years. Only the last 5,500 of these years have been partly recorded by scribes and historians. So, well over 99% of human story lies in the prehistoric past. Before we get into human evolution, we're going to go ahead and address this word, ruddy. I see so many people getting into it about the meaning of this word. And if you look at the Merriam-Webster's dictionary, it says of a person's face having a healthy red color. Even by that definition, the picture that people try to use as ruddy still wouldn't fit. This is ruddy. The reason we know that is what ruddy actually looks like is because the set apart texts are written in Hebrew. And the Hebrew definition for ruddy is a reddish or rosy color, usually considered a dirty, dusty, or dark-colored reddish orange. And it can also mean the shade of orangey brown. So, yeah, they are red. So again, by Hebrew definition, this would be red. This is sunburn. There's no way around it. Red on European skin is a burn. It isn't ruddy. Your skin isn't glowing. It's a sunburn. Since I already addressed the ruddy situation, I'm going to go ahead and address the fair situation. This is another word that once interpreted into the English language was grossly misinterpreted. So the word fair, when you look up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it says that it means light or blonde. And a lot of people use this word to establish the ethnicity of the people in the set-apart text. But again, the set-apart texts are written in Hebrew, and the Hebrew definition for fair means to be bright, to be beautiful, to be handsome, to beautify. It has nothing to do with skin tones or colors of hair. We get later in the series, and we start following King Dawid, and we start seeing scriptures like this, saying how he's ruddy and he's fair. I don't want anyone to start thinking or saying or trying to argue that he was of European descent or that he was of a mixed race. All right, so to get back on track, mankind. So the Hebrew word for man is Adam. That's right. It was never a name. It is the Hebrew meaning of man. Adam. And it derives from the Hebrew word Adamah, which means earth or dirt. So, man born of the earth. And translation turned it into an actual name. Humans evolved out of Africa. I don't know why this is still an argument, because according to the education system, this is something that is supposed to be learned in elementary school. But here we are, having to address this to get this out of the way. But it is a fact. According to the National Center for Biotechnology Information, Africa is also where people, ancient and modern, are most genetically diverse. It's Mr. Charles Darwin, and he is responsible for the transmutation theory, aka human evolution. And he stated that life was a branching tree, and we all evolved from something. He studied orangutans at the zoo, and he saw that they had human-like behavior. So he guessed that the people that we evolved from had to be apes or monkeys. In 1871, he wrote a book discussing the evolution of human origins among old world monkeys. Darwin gave a description of a hairy human ancestor with pointy ears, and that's where we get the caricature today of the ape man, or our ancestors, aka Lucy. And in his autobiography written between 1876 and 1881, he stated how much he hated religion because of its quote-unquote myths of eternal torment. Now, I don't know. It could be because of the life he was living. He did marry his cousin, so that is what led to a lot of his research, because he wanted to know how it would be if things crossbred. An ardent student of Mr. Darwin, Louis Leakey, he adapted Darwin's belief and believed that human derived from the monkey, the ape, or the chimpanzee. And in 1930, Mr. Leakey found some stone tools with several vertebrae, and he found a 25 million year old skull from an ape. Since no prior human skulls close to that date had been found, Mr. Leakey decided that this ape must be our ancestor, especially since we almost share the same bone structure, the same muscle structure. We both walk on two legs, and our skulls are almost the same. Mr. Leakey was one of the ones that really pushed the theory that we evolved from monkeys. I don't know if it was because of his fascination with monkeys and gorillas and things like that, because he was actually the real life Tarzan. Like, he was out there living with these monkeys. The only time he would come in was when, he had to make appearances for the higher ups and things like that, because he actually didn't do much field work. He was more of the face of everything. Flag on the play, flag on the play. So, after getting through the smoke and mirrors of it, it wasn't Louis Leakey who found anything. It was actually Mary Leakey that found everything. She is the one who found the bone. She's the one who found the skeleton. But why you don't see her name mentioned is because after her actual studying the bones and everything, she did not believe that we derived from monkeys. So Mary Leakey did not believe that the ape, the chimpanzee, the monkey, none of them were our ancestors. So with her not believing that, she made sure that her husband did not put her name on any of his theories. Let me see. They say that this is one of the ancestors of the human race. They say that she looked like an ape. She was a mixture of ape and human. But nothing was considered a mixture except for the dangling arms, pelvis, spine, foot, and leg bones, and the fact that they walk upright. And of course, with the theories from Mr. Darwin, Mr. Leakey, science ate it up and said, yes, we derived from monkeys. This is the paleoanthropologist Mr. Don Carl Johansen that found Lucy. And in a recent interview, the interviewer asked him about why they haven't found the quote-unquote missing link to prove that the apes are our ancestors. Well, Mr. Johansen went on to explain that they no longer use the term missing link. He made a whole bunch of other jibber jabber about the situation. But one thing that he did say is that they are still trying to find the link. We have to run that back. So in 2020, the Smithsonian published an article where they admitted that they had no way of knowing if Lucy really looked like an ape. They stated that she could have been a dark-skinned person, and there's no way of knowing that how much hair she actually had. Well, February of 2023, Life Science published an article where the frontiers in ecology and evolution admitted that the caricatures that you see of Lucy and of early ancestors that look like monkeys is actually race-based. None of it is factual. So they had started to redo earlier caricatures of the ancestors. It didn't stop there. They also stated that the reconstructions were influenced by imaginary tales about what is primitive and savage versus what is civilized and modern. In 2020, the Smithsonian started updating their caricatures of the first man or woman. So now here we are looking at Chicano. And Chicano Boy is 1.6 million years old. And he lived in northern, eastern, and southern Africa, West Asia, and East Asia. And I know what you're thinking, because I know somebody too that look just like him.
Yeah, I know you saw it too. Don Cheeto. He looked exactly like Don. If y'all don't stop playing with me.
Yeah. Looking at the oldest Asian fossil, she is dated between 100 and 60,000 years old. For years, we have been told that the Caucasian DNA has been around for 40,000 years. Some even say 50,000. But we were told that the DNA has been around that long. Matter of fact, it was at the beginning of the modern human, the human that we know today, that this DNA been around. But it's so funny, because when you get through the smoke and mirrors, let's see what we find. According to the National Library of Medicine, the Caucasian DNA is a bunch of mutations. And that mutation happened in Europe. I'm not talking Euro-Asia. No, I'm talking Europe. According to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, it found that the first European people had dark skin. So when modern humans traveled from Africa 40,000 years ago to Spain, Europe, Luxembourg, Hungary, they were all black people. So where it's ready to get real tricky. So they said the first farmers from the Near East arrived in Europe and they carried both genes for light skin. If they were already light-skinned people or had any Caucasian in them, it wouldn't be a mystery on how they were carrying genes for light-skinned people. So even the people in the Near East were black people. So, for the sake of clarification, the people from the Near East, aka the Middle East, were dark-skinned people, were black people. And they are the ones that carried the genes for the light skin to Europe. No place else. Not South America, not North America, not India, not Madagascar, not Asia, only Europe. The two different genes that they carried were albinism. Of course, there was different forms. And there are several forms of albinism, and we will go into detail about those forms when we are discussing Nova. But the albinism gene is still very prevalent today in people of sub-Saharan Africa, as well as African Americans. Sitting in the Smithsonian is the father of the Caucasian race, aka Mr. Cheddarman, and he is 10,000 years old. He was not found by himself. He was found with the whole village, but he is just the face. If you notice, he is very dark-skinned, blue eyes, and stringy hair. So when we see Caucasian DNA being 40,000 years old, this man, these people, is who they are speaking of. And according to National Geographic, the Caucasian or the Euro-Caucasus DNA didn't come around until 4,500 BC, which in turn means that it's 6,500 years old. That's it. And the reason why the Caucasian DNA is still up for debate, or the age of the Caucasian DNA is still up for debate, is because researchers and scientists have found out that when the migration back into Africa happened 4,000 years ago, those people that came back into Africa from Europe were still dark-skinned people. They were still black people. And the reason they found that out is when they found Mota and friends in a cave in the Ethiopian highlands. So Mota and friends had no Eurasian ancestry, but they carried both of the albinism genes. They were still dark-skinned people. And again, this is just 4,000 years ago. So they found out that the people that was coming back from Europe, back into Africa, was still dark-skinned people. I know after that last information, some of y'all need a break. Here you go. Good. We're moving on. Another one that we gotta get some clarification on Translation and transliteration are two completely, totally different things. And I know most of us think and have been taught that when we're reading the quote-unquote Bible, that we are reading a translation, but that is not correct. Scholars say that most of the Bible has been transliterated. The reason for transliterations is due to the Hebrew language from which all these Bibles derive. So if you were to ask a question, to be or not to be, in Hebrew, that would be a difficult question for them to answer. And it's because in the Hebrew language, there is no maybe. You either did it or you didn't. It either happened or it's going to happen. There is no in between. Also, for the Hebrew language, there is no vowels whatsoever. Vowels are implied. So, you would enter a vowel within your speech or speaking the word, depending on if the word was masculine or feminine, a noun or a pronoun, or whether it was an adjective, things like that, depending on which vowel you would verbally speak in between the letters. Also, there was no letter J. Matter of fact, J did not come around until the 14th century, and it didn't start getting widely used until the 17th century. So before that, there was no J in any language. Also, Hebrew, there was no V. So nothing had a V sound. That didn't come along until modern Hebrew, and modern Hebrew is after the second exile, and we will talk about that in detail later on in the series. Also, the W never ever made a vowel sound, as in wet. So the transliteration started from the very beginning of the so-called translations of the Hebrew set-apart texts. So they immediately replaced the names of the Most High and the Messiah with words like Christ and Lord and even Master. But the problem is none of those are names, those are titles. So when we come to scripture where it says for us to call out his name, and we're calling out Christ and Lord or Master, we're actually calling a title to who? But that's another subject. So we're going to take the name Melachim. So in the Hebrew text, you see Melachim, and it means messenger. Well, it doesn't specifically tell us if the messengers are from the Most High or if the messenger is from the adversary. So Melachim means messenger. And with the Greeks, they didn't have a word for messenger, so they used the Latin word, which was angelos. And that word means to send. And they figured that was close enough to messenger as can be. So now we have, in the English language, we have it as angel, and it means heavenly being. Now, if you look at that, you see we went from messenger to now being heavenly being. And that is how much of the quote-unquote Bible is now translated into. It is a bunch of words that does not have the original meaning of the Hebrew text floating around as this is what it is. A word that is transliterated too hard. The word of Torah. So if you look up the word Torah in a Webster's dictionary, it will tell you that it is a scroll of the first 5 books of the Bible, the Old Testament. So, here's the thing. During the modern Hebrew inception, a lot of things were translated into Greek. The word Torah in Hebrew actually means teaching, direction, and guidance. Well, when the new Hebrew language came around and the Greeks translated it, they added law into that transliteration. Well, if you look into the Bible now, wherever Torah is in the Hebrew set-apart text, the transliteration now shows law. But the problem is that when the Most High said Torah, he was actually talking about the teaching, the direction, the guidance. That is what he was talking about. And with most of us now seeing law in that, we have a total misconception of what Torah actually is. So yes, that word was grossly transliterated, and the commonly accepted law gives a very wrong impression. Another one. Now, when we get to talking about the Apocrypha, I don't even know if I should call this an actual transliteration or just a downright deceptive situation. And it's because when you hear about the Apocrypha, or you even look the word Apocrypha up, it tells you that the Apocrypha is a story or a statement of doubtful authenticity, although it is widely circulated as being true. You can also find that in the noun version, it is a biblical or related writing not forming part of the accepted canon of Scripture. And we're going to talk about the canon of Scripture in a moment. So it says writings or reports not considered genuine, right? And even a lot of Hebrews that I know, they don't put much faith in the Apocrypha because of all the hoopla about it. But I find it funny that they hold on to that King James version like it's sliced bread. But we'll get to that as well. But the Apocrypha. So these are the definitions in English and in Latin. But of course, once we get through the smoke and mirrors, we find out that this word is a Greek word, and it actually means to hide away, put in a vault. In Hebrew, it means external books. Now, with it meaning to hide away in its original language, you ought to start asking yourself, hiding what away? What you are looking at right now is the oldest Hebrew manuscript of the entire Old Testament. Has not been translated, has not been touched. It was found in Egypt, Cairo to be exact, and it is the Leningrad Codex. It now sits in the National Library of Russia. This is the Tanakh, and it is the Jewish Bible. This is the first translation that has ever been done. What many people don't realize is that the Greeks were the first one that invaded that land. And when they did that, they had all the Hebrew texts translated into Greek. And so this is their first translations of the Hebrew text. This is the Septuagint. Yes, it had the books that were deemed apocrypha in the translation. But it's also important to note that the Septuagint was actually translated from the modern Hebrew text. Again, they were translated from the modern Hebrew text, not the scrolls. Contrary to popular belief, the Septuagint was not perfectly translated. Again, they used the modern Hebrew words during the translations. Now, they did try to correct those translations and things in the 3rd century, but they were pretty wide spread by then. So there goes that. Also, the Septuagint did leave out the book of Enoch. It's left out of Septuagint as well as the Tanakh. And that was done by the Jewish people and their beliefs. Again, after the second exile, when the Jewish people came into being, they decided that certain books had to go. So that's when they excluded the book of Enoch. They did include the book of Maccabees, though, so they kept those, as well as a few other books. Like many of you, I had heard about the Dead Sea Scrolls on movies like Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, National Treasure, and many others. Archaeologists even label it as one of the most important finds in human history. But what really are the Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, they are a bunch of writings that date back to 200 BC, and they were found in a cave, the Qumran Cave to be exact, in 1947, and it took 10 years to get them all out. What are those writings, you ask? They are writings like the Book of Enoch, the Book of Maccabees. So many of the books that they labeled the Apocrypha have been dated and found as authentic. They were all written in Hebrew or Aramaic and Greek. And again, they date all the way back to 200 BC. The Dead Sea Scrolls have been proven that they date back into the Second Hebrew Revolt, so this after the Second Exile. Also, it was 981 different texts discovered in this cave. That's why it took so long to get them all out. Some of the stuff they are still actually trying to translate and piece together, putting it into its right context and things like that. And they use these Dead Sea Scrolls as proof, not only that the Hebrew people existed, but also that the Messiah was here. They use these both as historical and theological documents. I've heard Bruce tell me that they've never read the Book of Enoch, and it was only because it was written by a European. Well, after doing research and getting through the smoke and mirrors, I found Mr. James Bruce. So, Mr. James Bruce is a thief. So he actually stole the book of Enoch from Ethiopia because Ethiopia has the most or the only complete quote-unquote Bible, meaning it has everything, all the books of the Apocrypha, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and some other certified writings from other Hebrews. So Ethiopia has the most complete Bible on the planet. And James Bruce actually stole the copy of the book of Enoch and he took it to France. And it wound up getting returned in like 1773. But I don't know if he was able to translate it because the copy that he stole was in Ge'ez, which is still Ethiopia's language. So yeah, I didn't find any evidence that a European wrote the book of Enoch because honestly, the book of Enoch dates back to 200 BC, and during 200 BC, the European was just coming into fruition and they were totally in England. So these copies that they found with the Dead Scrolls were definitely written by a Black person and a Hebrew. So there goes that. Here it is, the Ethiopian Bible. It is the oldest and most complete Bible on earth. And as I said, it was written in Ge'ez. And it is 800 years older than the King James Bible. Yes. So, again, there's that. Jewish, relating to, associated with, or denoting Jewish people, or Judaism. That is the definition for Jewish. Now, the original definition for Jewish is descendant of Judah. But after the second exile, when Judah was exiled, when they brought back the quote-unquote tribe of Judah, it was not the original Jews. According to the Jewish archives and the Jewish encyclopedia, it was the Edomites that came back into the land, not the original Jews. Today, half the Jewish people identify as Ashkenazi Jews, and that is another different bloodline. However, the Ashkenazi Jews are a new branch in the Jewish world because they descend from the Europeans, and we all know, as we discussed earlier, European line is a fairly new line. They're only 6,000 years old or less. So, with that being said, the Jewish relating to, yes, they're related to the original Hebrew, a cousin, an uncle, an auntie, associated with, absolutely, because they are descendants from either Israel's uncle or brother, and denoting Jewish people. Absolutely. They are taking the place of the original Jewish person. And they did get converted forcefully to Judaism. Now, let's get some clarification on the Hebrew Israelite. So, a Hebrew Israelite is a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I don't know if many people remember this, but Jacob's name was changed by the Most High to Israel. So that part of the country is not named Israel because of just because. It is named Israel because that is the descendants of um, Jacob that established that part of the country. Also, Hebrews are the ancient ancestors of the Jewish people. Again, the Hebrew is what the quote unquote Jewish people turned into. So the biblical canon was a long process in the making. So it originally started with the Council of Rome in 382 AD. That was actually spearheaded by Constantine. Later on in the series, we actually talk in depth about the Council of Nicaea, Constantine, and all the bloody wars behind religion that happened. So in this council set, it was various councils. It was synods and popes from the Catholic Church. So they are the ones who decided that we're going to use this set of books. It wasn't based off of fact. It wasn't based off of authenticity. It was strictly based off of these are the books that I want my followers to read. So it also brought religion into one accord. No matter what religion you followed, ultimately you all read the same books. So they chose the books that they wanted their followers to read. And again, this started in 382 AD. But it wasn't until the year of 1546 at the Counter Reformation Council of Trent that it came into fruition of what we see today. So at that council, since all the other, manuscripts and things like that had been destroyed, it was easier to now get everything on one accord. So this council is actually the council as well, 1546, of Trent, who said, okay, now we're going to do these books into translations, into Latin and into English, into Russian, into German. The different translations came about was because of the Counter Reformation Council of Trent. And so from then on, the quote unquote Bibles that we see today were, chosen by this councils or these people, these popes and things like that. They are the ones who chose the books that would be in every form of the Bible. This is Saint Jerome. Yes, saint as in Catholic priest. He is the one that translated the set-apart text into Latin. Now, he didn't use the set-apart scrolls. He used the Septuagint. And as we all know, the Septuagint is made of modern Hebrew words and Greek. So that is what he used for the Latin translation. Also, anything that he couldn't find in Hebrew, or Greek, he translated it from Aramaic. This is a letter that Saint Jerome wrote to the Pope of Damascus, who had commissioned him to make the translations of the set-apart texts into Latin. And in this letter, he asked the Pope, why not just use the Greek version and just correct the translations instead of making a whole new translation into Latin? He also states in this letter that he wasn't even going to address the translations of the Old Testament that came from Hebrew to Greek then Latin. St. Jerome admits that the translations are so grossly misinterpreted, and I quote, either through faulty translations or through confident but unskilled translators were wrongly revised, or through sleeping scribes. Yes, St. Jerome felt that those translations were so off that they had to be sleeping when they translated. But nevertheless, he did fix some translations in the New Testament, and those books that he quote unquote translated from or fixed are listed in the letter, because he didn't translate all the books, so he did list the ones that he did do translations on, or corrected the translations on. But he didn't correct any translations on the Old Testament. So the translations that the modern Hebrews had did, or aka the Jewish people had did to the original Hebrew text, he just went ahead and carried on into the translated Latin text. This is Mr. William Tyndale, and he is actually the first person that translated the Bible into English from Greek and Hebrew. His translations are used later on, but at the time of him doing translations, they actually killed him for hearsay. This is King Henry VIII, and he is the first one that commissioned for the translation of the Bible into English. And he did it for political reasons. He was trying to get from under the Catholic Church, the Pope, who was in rule at the time. So he needed a Bible behind him in order to establish his reign. Mr. Miles Coverdale, and he is the one who actually did the translations for the Great Bible for King Henry VIII. He also was a student of Mr. Tyndale, and he actually worked on a couple of translations with Mr. Tyndale. So he was known as a translator. However, they did let it be known that he was rather free with his translations. This is the Geneva Bible, and it is 51 years older than the King James Version. It is the Bible that was used by William Shakespeare, the Pilgrims, the Puritans. It was part of the Protestant Reformation Act. It was used to establish the Protestant church. This is Mr. William Whittingham. He is the one that supervised the translations of the Geneva Bible. And guess who he collaborated with? Miles Coverdale. Starting to see a pattern here? No matter what the religion was or what the Bible was, they all collaborated in their translations. Remember, Miles Coverdale, he collaborated or went off of William Tyndale's translations. And now here we are 2 Bibles later, and we're still seeing Miles Coverdale So we went from the Great Bible to the Geneva Bible, and now we're at the King James Bible. Keep in mind, all of these were translated from the Latin text that was grossly misinterpreted. Preface this by saying that I'm talking to the brews out there who swear by the King James Bible. Do not come for me. Go and argue with Britannica. Argue with the London Archives. You go and argue with them, because right now we're just talking factual things. Now, with that being said, no, King James did not write a Bible. He did not. He did, however, commission a bunch of gentlemen in the year 1604. And one of the gentlemen that he approved to be a translator was none other than Miles Coverdale. That's right, Mr. Miles Coverdale was one of the ones that actually translated the King James Version, Mr. Free with his translations himself. Also, another fact, that King James Version Bible, including the 1611, is almost identical to the Catholic Bible. Yes, more than likely has something to do with the fact that all the translations have came from Mr. Tyndale work and eventually trickled down. But again, the King James Version Bible is almost identical to the Catholic Bible. This is Richard Bank, and he is actually the person that oversaw the 47 scholars that translated the King James 1611 version. Now, what was interesting is he was an archbishop, and during the translation process, he actually started kind of browbeating to institute some of his own beliefs into the translated version of the King James Bible. So, he wanted to, if he thought a word really meant XYZ and not what the translator said, they had to put in what he felt was the correct version. So, yes, he was a Protestant reformer. So he was trying to break away from the Catholic Church, and get his thing with his own religion about how they wanted to do everything. This is the Negro Bible. It was a thing. It did exist. So it was first printed in London in the year of 1807 on behalf of the Society for Conversion of the Negro Slave. Now, what was interesting with his Bible is that, the typical Protestant Bible, i.e. the King James Version Bible, has 66 books in it. The Catholic the Catholic Bible has 73 books, and the Eastern Orthodox Bible has 78 books. But this Negro Bible had only parts of 14 books. Yes. So anything that told the people who they were, anything that may have hinted about the power that they come from. The Hebrews being great warriors, being very well-learned people. All of that, anything of that was actually taken out of the Negro Bible. Ooh, finally the end. I hope that I answered enough questions and gave enough of a foundation for you to start asking questions for yourself and seeking this knowledge. And going forward, we won't have to address the same issues. We can address just the new ones that come about. Thank you so much for joining us with our first installment of Smoke and Mirrors. Hopefully you enjoyed us enough to catch us with our next installment, where we jump into the life of Noah. Hope to see you there. Shalom.